Enjoy the show! The year was 2015. MOBAs were the hottest new genre at the time, with titles like League of Legends, Dota 2, and Heroes of New World quickly taking the world by storm. Games all featuring lanes, items, heroes, and a complexity in game design not really seen before in the space of multiplayer competitive games. League was already in its 5th season, and Dota had just come out of its public beta only 2 years prior, when Blizzard's own take on the genre had finally been released. A Blizzard Dota called Heroes of the Storm, and a crossfire game that was quite different from what people had expected out of the traditional MOBA, one that tried to cater to a more casual audience in contrast from its 2 biggest competitors. As the years went on from 2015 onwards, the market for MOBAs had only been getting bigger and bigger, with games such as Wild Rift and Mobile Legends eventually filling the void in the handheld space. Dota and League, along with their respective studios, Valve and Blizzard, has seen success after success writing these IPs, eventually culminating with a healthy esports scene and multiple other media products such as shows, songs, and books to show for it. Heroes of the Storm, on the other hand, while released in 2015 and had seen some initial positive release, was never really able to capture the same following that its peers had, and in 2022 will be officially put in maintenance mode with the game no longer seeing any major updates. Fast forward to 2024, it's clear that HOTS is still frozen in time, with the last released hero being all the way in 2020, and both the competitive scene along with the development team being shells of their former selves. But how did a game that was so unique, backed by one of the biggest studios with some of gaming's most beloved IPs, turn out to be so underwhelming? A game that by all means should have seen way bigger success. The answer isn't simply mismanagement by Blizzard, or the design of the game alone, and like all things is much more nuanced. A simple game at its core that tried its best to do something different. So let's take a step back and see what HOTS was like and how it was so different from its peers. This is how this game made MOBA simple. Before we start talking about what HOTS is and really what it isn't, I think it's a good idea to see where MOBAs first started from. Chances are, if you've been playing games within the past 10 years or so, you have a pretty good idea of what a MOBA is. You think heroes, you think lanes, you think farming, and more importantly, you think some ancient Nexus patron or whatever it is called in your game of choice that you have to raise in order to win. But the origin of the MOBA precedes all of this. All the way back in the early 2000s, a custom map by the name of Aeons of Strife was gaining popularity in StarCraft, and it came along with the first iterations of many of today's standard mechanics. It was a PvP game where there were AI control units that walked down lanes, you controlled only 1 to a few units at a time, and you got minerals for killing creeps that you could spend to buy upgrades. But the difference is both the scale of the game as well as the similarities between each hero you picked, as there wasn't a major focus on individual hero skills since they didn't really exist at the time. It wasn't until the debut of the original Dota All-Stars map in 2003 for Warcraft 3 that the modern MOBA became a lot more fleshed out and recognizable from our modern day games. Not only was the scale of creeps scaled down each lane down to the single digits we have today, but there was a huge emphasis on heroes and they were stronger than ever, thanks in part to them being a huge hallmark mechanic of the base game. The neutral creams that were also present in Warcraft 3 also became one of the stable mechanics in all MOBAs. And ever wonder where items came from and why most games have a limit of 6? You get the idea, and the DNA of the modern MOBA can really be traced into what the original Dota All-Stars map had offered. A game entrenched with so many layers of mechanics that felt not only really rewarding to play and get good at, but also came with so much variety in every match. And even before League of Legends had released their first beta, or Dota 2 even had an alpha, Dota All-Stars already had a huge roster of 60 plus heroes. The game was a hit, and people knew that rightfully so, this was going to be the next big genre. So the scramble to design and publish the first big MOBA started, and people everywhere waited eagerly for what was going to come out next. Dota All-Stars was a semi-community-based project with more than a handful of creators that had contributed to its success, and its alumni will go out to help create League of Legends, Dota 2, and Heroes of New World. And the rest is history. League and Dota 2 would still manage to find continued success time after time, and even to this day. So this begs the question, where was Blizzard in all of this? Well, they were busy on their own iteration of the game. By the time the 2010s rolled around, they had announced during BlizzCon that they would release their own take on the genre, a Blizzard Dota that would eventually become Heroes of the Storm. But HOTS released in 2015, and was quite unlike a lot of the other games around. So the question is, what made HOTS so different? If you've ever played a MOBA before, or have tried, say, because you wanted to play with your friends, then you would know just how high the barrier to entry is, even more so for already established games. Titles such as League of Legends and Dota have been around for well over a decade now, built on a foundation of already complicated base mechanics and rosters that span well over into the hundreds. and combine this with the fact that mature games have skill levels well above newly launched games in general, it's easy to see why it's so hard to get into. The truth is that MOBAs are complicated, and there's a reason why within the past few years, we've seen them stagnate in favors of other games, such as tactical FPS or battle royale games, such as Valorant, Apex, or Fortnite, though that's a video for another day. Games that are complex such as Dota, Path of Exile, or RimWorld often have a very dedicated community of loyal fans who play the game on a near daily basis, which makes it really hard for people to get into, both in terms of the game itself and sometimes even the community at large. Blizzard and by extension HOTS, knowing that the game would be 5 years late to the party, tried to create their own take on the genre, one that aimed to reduce the overall depth and complexity in favor of a more lighthearted and casual audience. Something that on paper seemed like a good idea, a game made for people that felt ostracized by the high learning curves of other MOBAs. And Blizzard took this quite far, so here are just a few notable changes that set them apart. Teams have shared XP rather than individual XP, there's no gold, a lack of last hitting or denies, there are no items, heroes can pick talents at set levels, heroes have an out of combat mount, and the last one which we'll get into, which is that there's more than a dozen competitive maps. Now, if you never played HOTS before and have only tried some of the other MOBAs, all of this would sound crazy to you. It's almost unimaginable to think of no items or a shared team XP, as after all, this is one of the most important foundational mechanics that sets up a lot of how other games play out. Just imagine the likes of Dota without BKB or Blink Dagger, or even League without Zhonya's, and how much the game changed after the removal of Deathfire's grasp. The different variety of maps was also something that, while teased by other games, was fully embraced by HOTS. While the maps in Heroes of the Storm all have the same win condition of destroying the enemy team's core, each of the different maps have their own distinct theme, lane, and group objective, which was something that we've never really seen before, given that both maps in Dota and League have been there since the beginning. And while some games such as League and Smite have different maps for different modes, there never was a game that had such a strong emphasis on them until Heroes of the Storm. The game felt different and was really something new, but it never really took off despite the love and passion from Blizzard at creating something truly special rather than a more generic take that by 2015 was already being copied by everyone. But it's 2024, and you know how this ends. So the question is, why didn't it succeed? I think a good place to start is rather by asking the opposite. Why should have HOTS succeeded in the first place? After all, this was an ambitious and polished title from a beloved studio at a time when the genre was seeing a staggering amount of growth year over year. The game from the get-go was a crossover title, which features some beloved characters from IPs that were built well over a decade before the 2000s. Worlds such as StarCraft, Warcraft, and Diablo were really, and I can't emphasize this enough, really household titles. World of Warcraft was still going strong, StarCraft 2 was the premier RTS, and Diablo 3, while having a more mixed reception, was still taking in tons of players. And with characters like Arthas, Kerrigan, and Diablo being featured, there was little risk of people being disinterested in the heroes in this MOBA title, especially since, in my opinion, their adaptation into the MOBA genre was done really well, that came with playstyles fitting the existing characterization of the hero perfectly. The game's model was free to play, with heroes and skins available to both grind for and to purchase, with a live service model that would receive periodic updates, culminating with both the introduction of Overwatch heroes and eventually their own in-universe exclusive ones. And I know, no one really likes to talk about the monetization of a game and why it'll work, but I think it's a good point to bring out that the wrong model can lead to extremely disastrous situations, and was one of the biggest reasons why Heroes and New World's purchase-to-play model ended up being such a big contributor to their eventual decline. The game, while less complex and deep than its counterparts, was a super unique take on some mechanics that people thought were stable and unchangeable in any MOBA. And I think it's the biggest strength that HOTS has to offer, and shows that they designed this game with a clear audience in mind. And even for someone like me who's pretty familiar with MOBAs, I found myself at times really enjoying what this game had to offer, as it was a nice breath of fresh air from some of the more competitive titles available, especially given how much I enjoy Dota. Above all, the game in its initial release date was just good to play, polished, smooth, and fun. While your standards in 2024 may expect that every new title must be polished at a minimum, I'll speak from experience that with Dota and League during their early days, it really was the wild west out there. All of this combined with the resources of arguably the biggest studio back in 2015 should have made HOTS a hit. So what happened? Don't get me wrong, I played a lot of HOTS for this video, and I can see the appeal of it. And for a person like me casually playing this game, I found it extremely easy to get into and a solid title to sink a couple of hours into. But it never had the same depth that I come to expect from games such as League or Dota, or MOBAs in general, and always felt like something completely different. And it felt like something completely different. I think it tried to cater an audience that wasn't as big as what they had expected. MOBAs, despite the complexity being a big barrier to entry, is built on the foundation of having extremely deep mechanics. And anyone that was willing to play MOBAs for really any long length of time isn't put off by the endless amount of mechanics or nuances that these games have to offer, and is rather glad that they exist. He is glad that they exist. The core mechanics are still here, and knowing what is the correct move is just as difficult in this game as it is in other MOBAs. Only the mechanical complexity in lanes and the choice of items are gone. But the biggest hurdle of having to know the roster is still a problem in this game as it is in any other MOBA. So HOTS, while on paper is the easiest to get into, and in my opinion still is, it didn't shift the needle too much to casual audiences, and if anything, its limiting game design only shooed away from what otherwise would have been a much more hardcore and dedicated community. And speaking from personal experience, was a game that could never hold my attention compared to some other titles available. And I think League's approach of streamlining mechanics and bringing visual clarity is a good example of how we can design more casual games. And a lesson that while designing a game for casual players can be great, it's only good if it's not at the expense of eliminating your core audience. But the biggest downfall of HOTS was really how it was managed and prioritized. Remember how HOTS was released in 2015, a full 5 years after the initial public beta of Dota and League, despite being teased in 2010? Ever wonder why we think the mechanics that HOTS has to offer as unique and out of the ordinary? By the time HOTS had come out, the audience for these games had already come to expect a certain type of game from any MOBA that was going to be released. The expectations of HOTS was fundamentally different than the actual game that had come out, and to me, had set the tone for what the audience had wanted a few years prior. And truth to be told, in a world where HOTS would have been released around the same time as competitors, or maybe even earlier, I think it would have arguably had a bigger and more loyal fanbase than it does today, if it had only gotten the chance to make a first impression not yet set by other games. And as the years and years went on, an ever-increasing cycle of Blizzard reducing the marketing and development for HOTS due to its lack of popularity, and a lack of popularity due to less marketing and development had a stranglehold on HOTS, culminating in the end of its official esports circuit and all major patches in 2020s, where it remains today. A simple game with plenty of charm that failed to stand up with the titans of the industry. I'm glad that a game like this exists, and I applaud Blizzard for not only trying to design something new, but also try to cater to an audience that would otherwise be hesitant to try it at all, even if the end result wasn't perfect. A simpler game that wanted to show the world how fun MOBAs can be, and that they simply aren't reserved for only the most hardcore of players. And while I didn't find HOTS to be my cup of tea as a game to regularly play and get better at, I more than definitely enjoyed the games I've played so far, and it's something that I'll still regularly pop in every now and then for a change of pace. But the mechanics and depths of HOTS is past what I think people expect in MOBAs nowadays, a term so synonymous with layers and layers of mechanics that to expect anything else would rather be hard to take in. And I can't help but think in another world, the gameplay of HOTS will be wrapped in something outside of the genre term MOBA, and will come to define it more closely to a hero brawler than a MOBA does. For me, I like complexity in games, and the reward that comes with understanding them. And I'm sure I'm not alone in this, especially with games such as Deadlock now once again showing how MOBAs can evolve past the top-down genre while retaining the same foundation of the mechanics that made its successors so popular. And I hope developers can see from this that sometimes less really isn't more. So, as always, thanks for watching, until next time.